JavaScript is a spook. In fact, JavaScript is one of the biggest and probably most prolific forms of spooky technology that exist on the modern internet. Now, things haven't always been this way. The people that have been using the internet for a while probably remember how it was before JavaScript existed. But it's used so commonly now, and most of the times it's just unnecessary. People just use it to excessively make their web pages more bloated. But the issue of JavaScript goes beyond just bloat. So let me explain for those of you that are interested in the technical details. So I've done videos on fingerprinting before in the past, and basically it's just a process by which websites will collect information about the devices that are connecting to them, both the hardware and the software information, like your operating system version, your browser version. They can even detect your screen size, of course your IP address, which can also give them what city you're in, or just your relative locality. That's pretty much a given whenever you connect to a website anyway, but most of this fingerprinting is facilitated by JavaScript. Now, in some cases, aspects of this fingerprinting might be considered legitimate or even useful. So say, for example, that you are browsing the web on your phone. So a website knows, based on the user agent info, that it's a phone connecting to them. So most likely it's going to serve the mobile version of the website. That's probably what you want when you're on a phone. And then when you're on a desktop, you're going to get the desktop version of the website, obviously, what you would want on the computer. So that is kind of useful. And when you go to download software, like I would actually install Google Chrome, but you get the idea. When you go to download something, a website is able to detect what OS you're running. So it can give you the Linux version of whatever you're downloading in this case, or the Windows version, which is the more likely scenario because it's the Windows users that tend to download a lot of their software off the internet. But outside of these use cases, the JavaScript pretty much just serves the purposes of spyware to fingerprint your device, which, let's face it, this much device info, especially if you're using Linux, is pretty much going to be a unique identifier. You know, maybe you have like a MacBook with Safari or Google Chrome on it, or some type of Windows laptop that's really common. Then you'll be able to blend in a bit better. But if you've got like a DIY build with Linux on it, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb even in a large city. Now, to make things worse, JavaScript that's on web pages often gets obfuscated to save some space. So the code that's actually running in your browser, it's often going to have the white space and any type of indentation removed, and the variables might be shortened to like 2 or 3 characters. And also all of the comments explaining what the code does, how the different functions work, that's going to be removed. And so what you're left with is this spaghetti code that's basically incomprehensible. It's like, imagine if somebody had an essay that's written in plain English, but you remove all the spaces and you remove all the punctuation. It'd be pretty hard to figure out what you're reading there. And JavaScript is also a very flexible language. Now, this might sound like it's a bit of a good thing, but there's 2 dangers that come to this. One is the fact that if it's a very flexible language, and it's also just pretty easy to understand the syntax, so it attracts a lot of new people to it, people that are new to coding in general, and they're likely to take up JavaScript, and so since they're very new, they're likely to make a lot of mistakes. And it's also less likely for it to crash early on. Like, there's a lot of weird, undefined behavior that JavaScript does, as you've probably seen if you've ever looked at any memes like this, where, you know, there's just like setting equality and things like that in JavaScript can get a little wonky. And as you see, when it comes to things like typing, JavaScript can get a little silly as well. So you're likely to get JavaScript programs where they don't just have a hard crash like you would get with coding with other languages. You just get this undefined behavior, which could obviously have very bad reactions. And besides just undefined behavior, JavaScript is also often used to propagate actual malware. There's these things called drive-by download vulnerabilities that have existed in browsers before, where you'll either be redirected to a site or you'll be asked to download a file that might look like it's a PDF or something that you want to open, but the file or the site that you're redirected to is going to have a Trojan that allows somebody to remotely access and control your computer. And JavaScript can also be used to de-anonymize users. So if you have WebRTC enabled, that's kind of the most obvious one. JavaScript can reach through your VPN and grab your real public IP address. Now, a lot of the time, VPN providers will at least tell you about this, so hopefully you're taking the actions to mitigate it, or hopefully you're using a browser add-on like uBlock Origin that actually gives you the option to prevent WebRTC from leaking your IP address. And of course, if you're using Tor, then you're going to have WebRTC disabled, but even with that, it might still be possible to unmask your browser, even if you're using Tor, if your browser contains an exploit like the one that was found in Firefox back in 2013. So with this case, if you don't know about it, the FBI seized and hacked a child pornography site, and then they kept it running on their own servers for about a month or so with malware that was written into the site's JavaScript to track down and arrest the pedophiles that were connecting to the site, despite them using Tor. Now, I know some people might be thinking that this is an extreme case where the FBI just used one of those tricks that they have up their sleeve, a zero-day exploit in the Tor browser. Well, actually in Firefox as well, since that's what the Tor browser is based on. But they use that to track down and arrest some very bad, disgusting people, and the FBI would never abuse that. Sure. You know, you never know when another zero-day is going to make it into the browser. There could even be means of using JavaScript to de-anonymize Tor users right now, and there's no guarantee that the FBI is going to use it for always morally righteous purposes. I mean, you can just look at their track record. Now, there's also a lot of non-free programs that are written in JavaScript and run on your computer whenever you visit websites that have them. So if you're going for, you know, the full free software utopia or whatever in your computer usage, like if you want to have a Libre booted ThinkPad and you want to have a completely free and open source OS, you're not using any non-free drivers or programs, then you're probably not going to want to run non-free JavaScript when you're surfing the web. So you're going to have to either just mostly avoid JavaScript altogether or at least filter out the non-free JavaScript. So these are all good reasons to ultimately limit the usage of JavaScript exposure by limiting its usage on new projects, to try and avoid sites that make excessive use of JavaScript, or at least mitigate them with add-ons like Libre.js, uBlock Origin, and NoScript that can prevent all scripts, or, well, Libre.js can prevent all scripts, or it can just prevent non-free scripts, because obviously if the JavaScript is non-free and it's not doing anything malicious, then it's probably not that bad. But yeah, you can also use external tools to stream or download content locally to your computer. That way you can just avoid running the JavaScript in the browser that normally serves that content. And you can obviously support websites and services that don't overutilize JavaScript to help keep the internet a little less bloated and a little less spooky.